Eliot Clough, Sean Bock here for Hawkeye Insider and Swarmcast. Talking a little hoops today. Of course, we've done the portal. Dave and I talked about the portal last week. If you want to check that out, it's here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you're listening, YouTube as well. So you can check that out elsewhere. A few more additions made, but nothing major. Emmanuel Olagbaju, Tanner Philpott, and I can't even pronounce what's the other guy's name? The receiver from SMU.
Begley, what's his name?
Begley. Begley?
Beagley,
Something like
Lance
that.
Beagley.
Yeah, there we go. Thank you, Sean. So if you want to hear Dave and I talk Portal, what we think of that, you can check that out on the last pod today. Sean and I talking all men's hoops after they break that losing streak, get the win over Indiana, and of course they're heading back home and playing against Rutgers tomorrow night, Tuesday at home. Sean, let's look back at the three-game losing streak first. They go on the road to Minnesota, drop that one despite a furious comeback in the last like 4 minutes. And kind of the same deal against Illinois and Purdue. Purdue is one that was close throughout the whole game, and then the Boilermakers separated at the end. But um, awesome start to the season, and then the three-game skid. It almost seemed like, well, it's a fan base, right? People were starting to lose hope already and losing on the road to Minnesota, who has greatly improved since the beginning of the season. And then Illinois and Purdue, who are two top 13 teams in the country. All the while, I was dealing with this sickness. So, what were you thinking over this stretch? Because I have my opinions, but I want to know what you were thinking over this stretch because you were there as well for the Indiana and the Purdue game out there in Indiana. So, tell me what you were thinking over that stretch of losses.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely one where, with this team and how things were going and, coming from the Missouri Valley to the Big Ten, I think a lot of people expected that there would be, some difficult stretches or some difficult really bumps that they would have to overcome. And I think a number of these things too is you look at some of the teams that Iowa played, like I don't think the matchups were necessarily working in Iowa's favor in those games either. Like even Minnesota. Iowa just didn't really have an answer for Langston Reynolds, who really had his way in Minneapolis, and Iowa struggled offensively too. I thought there were a number of things, and the big thing too with this throughout this stretch has been Bennett Sturts battling foul trouble, and honestly, Iowa has responded pretty well in those situations. But I think on the defensive end and really offensively too, I think the offensive flow starting really at the end of that or in the second half against UCLA, and then honestly, all throughout maybe Minnesota and through most of that Illinois game, I thought the offensive flow was really, getting disrupted. I thought Minnesota did a really good job of taking away Iowa's rollers on some of the ball screens that they like to do, which prevented Iowa from getting into those, second and third actions with which McColllum really talks about. And when those rollers are a lot more present, as we saw against Indiana, and then maybe in doses against Purdue, but more so against Indiana, that really opens up a lot of avenues on the offensive end to allow you to play advantage basketball, to have rollers or like cutters, divers to the rim. You have guys that can get kick out threes. So Minnesota and Purdue and Illinois did a really good job of eliminating those and using their length and their athleticism to their advantage. I mean, Purdue, I thought Iowa did a better job against Purdue, being able to counter that. But it also helps when you have guys like Cale Combs and Savion Banks hitting the three as well as they did. And they're not necessarily known to be, big time shooting threats as well. But I thought during that stretch, I mean, there were adjustments too that they made with certain things in terms of like you don't want to talk about the officiating too much, but I thought there were certain things that they did with Bennett Sturts to be able to get him in more position to draw fouls and be able to get some of these fouls, which other guards in the Big Ten have been able to get. But then again, like I said, I really think these games came down to matchups. I mean, Minnesota, Nico Medved runs a lot of really good half court sets and, a number of things too that Iowa seemed to really struggle with and really wasn't ready for. And then obviously having Reynolds there, was a big difference maker in that game too for Minnesota. And having a guy like Kate Tyson who's so good at shooting off the catch and shooting off screens and, making plays at his size was something too that was a real difference maker. And then Illinois and Purdue, like McCollum talked about it after the Illinois game, is that the Illini do such a good job of being able to leverage each other up. And they had guys too, like they just had responses for everything that Iowa threw their way in that in that, throughout the game, like really, especially the second half, but also in the first half too. Like Illinois just had a response for everything. And the guys just do such a good job of playing off each other. Like that team is so good at playing off of each other. And then we saw that kind of happen again against Purdue, where Purdue was able to play off of each other and really, leverage each other up. Braden Smith decided to become the best point guard in college basketball in the second half. And, Iowa just didn't really have a counter for that either. But then against Indiana, like, I think it almost was like, it's like everything just kind of worked well together in that game. Like everything that they struggled with in those three losses, they were able to really put the pieces together, really, put together a full game performance because we've seen that Iowa has struggled during these stretches where, defensively they've had lapses, offensively they've had lapses, but they really didn't have any of those against Indiana. Like they were also able to respond too, similar in a way that, Illinois was able to respond really well when Iowa, kind of threw a punch at them. The same way that Minnesota was able to respond really well when Iowa came back, and the same way that, it took some time for Purdue to respond, but Purdue was able to respond really well, and Iowa was able to do that when Indiana was able to threaten. And that really comes down to making winning plays too, and kind of just having that like sense of being able to win and being able to make those winning plays at the end of the game. And obviously, Bennett Sturt's hitting those 2 3-pointers against Indiana in the second half was critical too. But you look at Tavion Banks. Alvaro Fulgaris, I thought had a really good effort in the second half defensively against Indiana. Um, Tavion was so good in transition, finishing at the rim in the second half. Number of other guys, Tate Sage hit some pretty big shots. Cam Mania was really active too. Like they were just guys stepping up and being able to make those winning plays that, they weren't really able to accomplish in those games against, where they lost.
There's a couple things that stick out to me regarding, first of all, Minnesota, that one very easily could have gone Iowa's way. You get three shots in the final 11 seconds to tie it, two of them from Bennett Sturts, one from Brendan Hassan. Like you take that every time. They just missed. Those are two of the better shooters, probably in the, if not the Big Ten, in the country. And so you take what you can get there. To me, especially from the Illinois, Purdue, and Indiana games, I think what we learned from the Minnesota game as well is that Hassan is only going to play in particular situations. That's just the way it looks right now, unless something drastically changes with the rotation. I think you just get better athletes in like a Cale Combs and an Isaiah Howard in those spots, and that allows you to do some different things. It's just like the net is more positive between those two versus Hassan, who is one of the elite shooters, but you got to have him do some more things. And so that's one takeaway regarding probably Minnesota. And I mean, there's a reason Iowa was looking at Cade Tyson out of the portal too, and why there was a strong possibility that he was going to end up at Iowa, and some things fell through. But then you look at Illinois and Purdue, and Illinois is full of Eastern European guys that can hoop, plus the point guard that's a freshman that's really freaking good. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but they've
Eden
just
Wagler, yeah, he's a stud.
there you go. They've just got pieces galore, and they've got older. Those Eastern European guys are a little bit older. Had been there, done that. I mean, Peja Stojakovic's son, like what? Obviously, he's going to be an awesome shooter, awesome player. You go to Purdue and Braden Smith, and actually, let me revert back to Minnesota. Is the top four scorers on the team Bennett, Maniau, Alvaro, and I think Cam didn't score. I already said Cam. Who's the fourth? Is it Isaiah Howard? Oh,
It
Tavion.
would be, yeah,
Tavion
Tavion, yep.
didn't score in the first half. And across those games, I think a good chunk of the team was sick too. So you factor that in. Not an excuse, but you factor it in, especially when you lose to that Minnesota team. My other point I wanted to make is one, Illinois and Purdue are both really good. Purdue, Braden Smith is the best point guard in the country. He really flipped a switch in the second half. And they also got some favorable calls in Mackey Arena for sure. The other thing about all of these games is Bennett, you mentioned the foul trouble. I think they're starting to figure that out because Obviously, some calls didn't go their way at Purdue, but Bennett did get in that early foul trouble, but he didn't get another foul the rest of the first half. And you have to love McCollum's trust in his guys to stay on the floor even with two fouls in the first half. Um, there was another point I was going to make in there. Bennett didn't take, there were some games where his shot selection wasn't great. I really thought, again, it's a fan base. Emotions are high in the middle of games, especially after losses. Fine. But I'm going to die on the hill, even if Iowa loses every single game. Not maybe not every single game, but this 3 game losing streak, the hill that I was dying on is that Bennett Sturts is still one of the best point guards in the Big Ten and in the country. Couple games doesn't determine how good you are overall throughout the whole season. And we saw that particular against Indiana because he controlled the game at different parts of that one. The other part is he needs consistent secondary playmaking help, whether that's Tavion, whether that's Alvaro. And at this point, I don't know that they're going to get it from Alvaro. So at this, I think it's got to be Tavion. I mean, it's a long season. A lot of things can change. Something can click for Alvaro. And he was good defensively, like you mentioned, against Indiana, but I wouldn't say a non-factor, but he wasn't. Did he score against Indiana? I don't think he did.
That first half stretch was really bad. I think
Really bad.
he was bad in ball. His ball screen coverage has not been good. That's been one of the issues that he's been kind of dealing with. But he had some good moments against Indiana in the second half. But I mean, from a perspective like defensively, he is Iowa's probably best shot alterer at the rim. Like I think Cam Manyaw is a shot blocker, like capable of shot blocking, but like he doesn't have the length that Alvaro does. He doesn't really have that, type of yes, he can, spring off the floor, but I think Alvaro is a lot more his length allows him to be a little bit more disruptive at the rim. And, his length is a real asset for Iowa on that end, especially with also getting deflections too on the perimeter.
Yes. So if Tavion can be your second guy consistently, be like he was against Indiana, then the ceiling of this team goes up and up and up and up. Because I just don't know if it's going to be Alvaro on the offensive side of the ball. We need to see either more be his ability to create off the dribble needs to improve because he can catch and shoot on the perimeter and maybe add some sort of repertoire to his bag too. And he did attack a couple times. I think there was a shot fake layup at Purdue that was really impressive to me, but he's got to be more consistent. And obviously, you don't have the elite catch and shooting with Brendan Hawson on the bench. Cale Combs looked really good during the losing streak, didn't look particularly great. I mean, he wasn't bad, I would say, against Indiana, but he wasn't as good as he was during the losing streak. But you don't want to have to rely on Cale Combs to be that guy, obviously, because they lost those games. If he is and wins, then awesome, but he can't be your secondary that's just not who he is. He's a good backcourt complement to Bennett Sturts, but I think if anybody on this team is going to be the scoring complement, the energy complement, the defensive complement to Bennett, it's Tavion.
Yeah, I don't think you're far off there. I think if Tavion, like, he's been able to expand things a little bit more in terms of his game, like being able to shoot the three has been a nice plus for him, but his ability to relocate on the floor and, be able to kind of, play off cuts and play off other guys drawing two on the ball, that's like something that's really impressive. And that also is something that takes time within playing in the system. But also too, like I think you have to really talk about some of these other guys who have been able to step up like as kind of those third and fourth scorers in these types of games when Iowa has these one or two guys that are really carrying the load. You already talked about Cale Combs. I mean, Cam had 13 points against Purdue.
Mhm.
Um, Tate Sage had 7 points against
Yeah.
Indiana, and he was really, like I think his offensive rating was like extremely high. And
Tate's been
that's also
awesome.
too yeah, he's been really good, like especially in the limited doses. Like you can keep him on the floor for extended periods of time and he'll be able to compete. But I thought he had some defensive issues against Indiana here and there that, that's just matchup stuff too. But I thought one of the things that Iowa did a really good job of against Indiana was matchup hunting. That's something I've talked about a lot and I've talked about with people outside of, in the college basketball world too, is something that this Iowa team doesn't really seem to do. a whole ton is matchup hunting, but also I think that also because of those matchups that they've gone, that they've had where they haven't been able to do that. But against Indiana, they were able to do that. What were they able to do against Indiana? They were able to get Tucker DeVries in ball screen coverage, make him defend, and Tavion Banks took advantage of him, and he was not able to, really be good in ball screen coverage. And Indiana was going into that drop coverage because the rollers were very present, and trying to take away those rollers. But then you got Bennett Sturts, who's able to just navigate things so well and really dictate the tempo against that drop coverage. Um, Against Indiana too, like, Bennett was going more north-south, being able to draw those fouls against a pretty aggressive Indiana defense, Connor Enright, and was able to kind of change things up with the way that he was, navigating the fouls and, navigating the defense and, how Indiana was playing him, and he was able to get those foul calls that, maybe Braden Smith was able to get against Iowa in that game and has been able to get throughout his career. Um, and I said Banks too with going up against Tucker, and there were a couple of other I think he went up against Trent Sisley a couple times where they really tried to get him the ball. But if you're able to go up against some of these teams and really matchup hunt, which I think Iowa's going to be able to do pretty well against Rutgers and should be able to do decently well in some of these other games, that really opens up a whole lot because look at what Illinois did in the first half against Iowa. They were putting Stojakovic was attacking Cooper Koch any chance he got. Mirkovic was attacking Cooper Koch, and Cooper's an improved defender, but there's a clear, like, I guess, difference between those guys' offensive game and their skill sets and their bills versus how, Cooper's able to play defensively. Because I thought Cooper was really good defensively against Indiana and even in moments against Purdue. Obviously, his shot has not been able to fall as much as he's wanted to over the last couple games, but I think just the value of matchup hunting is so important in college basketball and is so important just like in any stage of college basketball. I mean, look at what Minnesota did against Iowa with Langston Reynolds. Like we're just able to attack, 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 use him on different guys, use him in the post, use him in some booty ball actions. Um, and that's something that I think Iowa really needs to explore in some of these matchups. And I know, they're not going to have guys that are going to consistently be able to do that as much as some of these other teams. But you really have to be able to seek out some of those matchups. And they've done it with Alvaro too, using his back to the basket. But obviously he hasn't been as consistent as, some of these other guys. But I think if you're able to match up hunt and you're able to really seek out these matchups and things that work, you're going to be in a much better position to, ultimately really, you know, get the offensive output that you want because you have capable scorers. You just need them also to hit shots. And, Iowa was able to do that the last couple of games and, throughout their Indiana road trip. I mean, not as much against Illinois. Yes, they had a couple of really key buckets throughout that game, but Illinois was able to have a response. And, Iowa has to be able to have a response in some of these games where teams are going to go on runs and they have to have guys who can really step up and hit shots. And, Cale Combs and Tavion were able to do that against Purdue. Bennett had a couple of moments in the second half as well. But then obviously Bennett and Tavion carried the load against Indiana. But I really think being able to match up on against some of these teams coming up is really going to be important and really for the rest of the year. I mean, I know, like I said, it's going to be tough against some of these other teams like Purdue and whatnot, but you just have to be able to really navigate these types of things. And, McColllum makes a good point too. I know he's not using it as excuses, but he says like, they have enough, like they have stuff on these teams, but these scouts are like exhausting before games because he has really nothing to work with, with the system, like the coach's tendencies, like stuff like that. So it's really up to them to be able to put together a really complete scout without, much like of what tendencies are besides what they can, see on film this season and, past years but also like being able to execute it too. Like I thought Iowa executed its game plan incredible against Indiana. Like I thought it was really, really good outside of when Tavion Banks was not guarding Tate Connerway because when they had someone else on Tate Connerway, he was able to get to the rim whenever they wanted. But when Banks was on him, it was a much different story. So I think too, like I said, matchups are so important in the Big Ten and in college basketball as a whole. And I don't think Iowa is one of those teams that you look at and you're like, man, they can really match up well against most of these teams in the Big Ten. It's honestly the other way. But just being able to find work off those things because if you can hit shots like Banks and Combs did against Purdue, that's going to really make a big difference against some of these teams that, may have a better matchup than you, or, you don't match up as well with. That's able to offset things a little bit, which is not easy to do, but you have to be able to kind of get those contributions from guys that you kind of don't expect it to on a consistent basis on the offensive end. And then defensive end too, like, it goes hand in hand. I think defensively, there were a lot of really good improvements. I thought they did a really good job of staying in the gaps against Indiana. I thought ball screen coverage on Smith was awesome in the first half at Purdue, but then Smith was kind of like, you know what, I'm the best point guard in the country. I'm going to go and do what I want. So that's a tough thing there. But I think there's room for improvement, and they have been taking, steps forward, which is nice. It's just important to not be able to take that step back. So you have to be able to keep building. I think they're starting to figure that out a little bit.
If there is a stretch to take that step forward, I think it's right now. We've mentioned a few times Rutgers tomorrow night, Tuesday night, and then it's USC, and then it's at Oregon, at Washington, Northwestern, at Maryland before you get Purdue on Valentine's Day. Purdue and then Nebraska back to back. So that will be very interesting. Of course, Price Sanford coming back to Iowa on the 17th. So that'll be a fun one. I'm sure Carver is going to be packed. And it's really nice. I'll just add this quick, and we've been saying it a little bit throughout the season, but it's really hit a new level in this Big Ten schedule. Is fans are starting to show up to Carver Hawkeye, and it is so much more fun to cover games now. It's so much more fun to just be in that environment, and I think that Nebraska game in particular, again, that's like a month away, so don't want to get too ahead of ourselves, but that one's going to be really fun. It's a blackout, which is kind of funny, playing against Nebraska. But the other thing that I'll add that you've mentioned as far as making shots and sort of the rest of the group. I mean, you go down the list of the roster, and I kind of highlight. I mean, uh, I did highlight Tavion there as the sort of the second guy, but you need the complementary 3 through 5, to make shots when they're afforded the opportunity to make those shots, like a Cooper Koch, like a Isaiah Howard, like a Cale Combs, um, like a Tate Sage, like a Alvaro. I mean, if you can have, and it doesn't have to be one consistent tertiary scorer, but as long as it can be like fluid between 3 through 6 or 7, and one guy can get 10 points and another guy can get 7, I mean, I think you're sitting in a really good spot. I mean, going back to the game against Indiana, let me see if I can find that box score really quick. But to go off of that, Tavion and Bennett combined for 53, and nobody else scored in double digits in that game for Iowa. So if you can get, I mean, they still won by like 20. So but it was a collective effort. Like a bunch of guys had 6 or 7, 5, 6, 7 points, and that adds up. Well, I guess not a bunch, but a few guys did. So it is more than just Bennett and Tavion. I that wasn't the point I was trying to make earlier, but yeah, I mean, anything else over this stretch, over the win, over, what's going ahead? I don't really have anything else for where the team is at currently, other than if you haven't seen what Ben said today, just the presser, it was just a lot of really good stuff. Wasn't anything like major, but if you're able to check that out on Hawkeye Insider, we have the videos, we have the transcript for free. So it's about like Bennett's recruitment, Tate Sage's recruitment. Really interesting stuff. Really a look inside Ben McCollum's mind. So go check that out. But anything else from these last 4 games or looking ahead here, Sean?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things too is we're seeing how Iowa's style of play and how they want to play, and why getting into these offensive actions and being able to play off of each other is so important, because not a lot of teams have the discipline or like the total defensive awareness. Like it can be really exhausting to have to defend for 25, 26 seconds, and then being able to get a really pretty good shot off late in the shot clock. I mean, there are times where I wish Iowa would play a little bit faster, just in terms of, pushing the tempo, because they've done such a good job in transition this season. I mean, in Big Ten play, I had the stat yesterday where I think Iowa's averaging like 1.6 points per possession in 40 transition possessions this year. A lot of that too is because in Big Ten play, a lot of that too is because committing live ball turnovers. That's why it's so important to get these live ball turnovers. Be in the gaps, get deflections, block shots, push the tempo. Because Iowa has proven that it can be really, really good in transition and when it pushes the ball, and that's just like another added weapon to what they want to do offensively. But I think you saw against Indiana just how much like some of these teams really struggle to be able to contain a team like Iowa, even if they don't have, the offensive firepower outside of Sturts, how important it is, to be able to defend for extended possessions and extended periods of time. And I know a lot of people talked about Iowa, the nervousness of Ben McColllum coming here where, they're not going to play at a fast pace. Like, obviously, they play with pace and rhythm in the half court. They just don't have as many possessions. And that really can throw teams off, too. Like, I mean, you had to play a little bit faster against Purdue just because I mean, I know Purdue likes to play in the half court, wants to go through their sets. But yeah, I think you do have to play a little bit faster, and Iowa was able to do that. But I thought against Indiana, you really saw them kind of phased in terms of, how Iowa was playing. I think the total possession count was like 58 and Indiana averages like 68 per game or something like that. And that's a really big difference. And even with Indiana, like they were kind of just chucking it, felt like in the second half at times. And Iowa was really able to kind of know limit those possessions and just limit possessions as a whole. And that can really, falter against some of these teams where, maybe they want to get up and down the court and they don't really care as much about like how efficient they are in each possession, rather that they're just putting up as many points as possible. So it's really important just to be able to, keep that offensive flow and keep that rhythm like they did against Indiana. And, be able to get into your actions, be able to get in what you want to do. Let Bennett starts, get downhill. Because when Bennett starts or Caleb Combs is able to get downhill and play that advantage basketball, that makes all the difference in the world with this group. So, yeah, it's going to be a Tuesday against Rutgers should definitely be one that Iowa takes care of and takes advantage of and wins that one. But then we'll have a podcast, I'm sure, previewing the upcoming stretch. But this stretch of one will include Rutgers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games. Like that should be either 6-0 or 5-1. I
Hmm.
really think so. And Iowa's put itself in a good position in the bubble or in the NCAA tournament stuff too, even without really like a true signature win. I think they're 1.3 wins above the bubble right now, which is a really big metric in this year's NCAA tournament, kind of just, determining the field, which is, really going to set them up for this stretch, especially if they can take care of business because you got three quad 1A games in a row with Nebraska, with Purdue and Nebraska at home, and then Wisconsin on the road, and then you play Michigan and Nebraska again at the end of the season. So there's plenty of opportunities, but there's also games that you got to take advantage of where you're going to be in a pretty good spot matchup wise. And also, Washington struggled with injuries. I think they're getting healthier now, but they struggled with injuries. Oregon's got a really like Jackson Shellstat is out for the year. Their best player, their leading scorer, the point guard, he's really dynamic talent. So there's these games on the road and at home that you got to take advantage of that would help your resume for sure. I mean, especially the ones on the road. If you can go 2-0 on that West Coast road trip and then take care of business at home against Northwestern and then, steal another one on Maryland, you're setting yourself up for a really, really good, you know, resume going into that really difficult stretch of 3 games in a row against quad 1A opponents.
The one thing I thought of before when we were talking about the Indiana game that I want to make sure I add, and I included it in my gamer and I tweeted it at the end of the game, is that I think Ben kind of coached circles around Darren DeVries. So Beth Getz may have. I think Beth Getz made the right hire for a lot of reasons. That's just one of them. The other one that I wanted to make is you mentioned you'd like to see Iowa maybe play a little bit faster or at least get the tempo up. One thing that I've noticed is Iowa will occasionally pass up a good shot too late in the clock to try to get a great shot as the shot clock is maybe expiring or really dwindling down and they have to force something. That's something I want to see improve. I should have asked about that today at the media availability. Either way, that'd probably be something that would be good to ask going forward. So I'm intrigued about that. That is one of the maybe not glaring, but one of the things that has stood out to me. about the season thus far. Like you said, big stretch ahead. I'm in the same boat. I think they should go 5-1 or 6-0 over the stretch. You mentioned Washington. They're a program that throws money at problems and hopes it fixes it.
Right. I think Danny Sprinkle's a good coach too, but it's just it's a weird deal. I mean, they lost at home to Michigan State. That's always tough.
Yeah.
On the road, lost at Indiana, Purdue. So this stretch, we'll know more about this Washington team because I think they're starting to get a little more healthy. But obviously, Desmond Cloud's out for the year too, so
Yep. That's huge.
that's a that makes a big difference. But Steinbeck's a stud. Granted, he's really freaking good. Then they have, Wesley Yates, who absolutely killed Iowa last year at USC. So they're
And
still a pretty talented team.
they just got Ognachovich back as well,
Oh yeah.
who's a guy that Iowa wanted out of the portal from Lipscomb. So
Yep.
they'll have some more talent. Of course, Sean and I will be all over that. Portal is not done. We're gonna get intel on that for football here shortly from our Alan True on Cody Haddad, the Ohio State transfer on campus this week. So we will have intel there. Of course, Dave, Sean, and I covering men's and women's basketball going forward. And make sure that you subscribe here on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you're listening to this podcast. Before you get out of here, leave that rate and review. Helps people find us and get a listen to Swarmcast here from myself, Sean, and Dave. So for myself, Elliot Clough, and Sean Bock, we will see you next time.